Hi, folks. We're just going to give a second for everyone to join the room. And then we'll get started. So we'll give a couple more minutes because we only have a fraction of the folks that registered for this morning's session in the room. So please just bear with us. So folks, you'll see in the chat that there is a link you can click that will take you to all kinds of resources, guides, flowcharts, documents, just while we're giving a couple more minutes for folks to participate. Folks, if you have any questions, because I do see a hand up, we actually can't take live comments, like for you to come off mute, but there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That function is what we're using. If you can type in there any question or comment that you have, and we will respond to it that way. Some of these sessions have been really large, and so just trying to effectively manage the comments and questions and so forth, the Q&A box has been the most effective. So Shell and Liz, should we get started? Yep, okay. All right, folks. We might have some more people join us as we go through, but for the purpose of time, we'll proceed. So good morning, everyone. As we begin this morning, this information session on WFAA, the Workforce Adjustment Appendix, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are probably all coming from various different Indigenous lands in Ontario, and that Indigenous people have been and continue to advocate and fight as stewards and keepers of the land and water. I invite all of us to reflect on our relationship that we have with the land and the original peoples, and encourage you to continue to actively seek truth as well as participate in reconciliation. Liz, can you go to the next slide, please? So just also acknowledging that wherever we are in Ontario, that we are on stolen land and need to continue to advocate for respect of the land and the original peoples. The next slide, please. My name is Nicole Wall, and I am a regional rep out of the Toronto office. And I am here today with Shell, who you see on screen and is a regional rep out of the London regional office. And we also have Liz Walker, who's a rep out of the Toronto office and going to be helping with the tech and the Q&A box and all of that stuff. So we're all playing various functions at different times and are here to support this process. So thank you for joining us. These sessions that we're doing around workforce adjustment are designed to inform members about the process. To try and give the most easiest access to information, we are using this QR code as well as the Linktree website, which Liz has posted in the chat for you, but you can use your camera to take a picture of the QR code, and it's going to take you to a lot of relevant documents, whether guides, flowcharts, fact sheets, and other pieces of information that will help you get a better understanding of the workforce adjustment appendix. And then, of course, we're going to go through this process today, doing our best to explain what the process looks like and the various options available. If for some reason you would like a hard copy of the guide or any of these materials that can be found in this QR code, please reach out to your closest PSAC regional office and we can have those sent to you or provide those to you. At various times through the presentation, you're going to see different QR codes come up, the same QR code come up that will take you to these documents. So even if you missed it on the screen, Liz, I'm not actually seeing the presentation right now. Just give us 1 second, folks. But as you see the QR code throughout the presentation, you'll have an opportunity to take a picture with your phone if you've lost the access to the link. And then again, it's also in the chat for you. Throughout the presentation, we're also going to use various terms that some of you may be familiar with and some of you may be hearing for the first time. So in that QR code, there is also a document that details various definitions that are key to workforce adjustment. So please reference that if any of the terms that we're using aren't familiar to you. Liz, do you need one of us to show the presentation? Shell, I wonder if you can show it just in case that update happened and Liz isn't even able to come off mute.
No problem.
Bear with us. Technology is not always our friend. So if you can go to slide 5, if you're able to, Shell, that would be great.
Sorry, just bear with me. It's just frozen on my the introduction screen.
No worries.
Let me thanks for your patience, everybody. Just give us 1 minute to just sort out this tech issue.
Oh,
okay.
I think Liz is good.
Now,
Okay,
it's now working.
awesome. So I just need, when you're able, Liz, slide 5, please. Thank you. So we know that capitalism works in cycles of expansion and contraction, right? Alternating between periods of growth and then there's slowdowns. And that these fluctuations directly influence budgetary policies as well as government decisions. So PSAC has always fought for a strong public sector and quality jobs. Whenever these gains have been threatened, the union has taken action to protect them. But the public service cuts just keep coming. Um, the public service cuts aren't anything new. For decades, various governments, whether liberal or conservative, have imposed budget cutbacks in various forms, and that could be through wage freezes, as well as privatization, layoffs, or restructuring. And one of the most brutal waves that we experienced was in the 90s under the Jean Chrétien government, where they eliminated 45,000 jobs and suspended the workforce adjustment directive. And this deprived public service workers of critical protections. Without having this mechanism, many employees were pushed out and didn't have any real alternatives. And it weakened the public service and also left the folks that still remained in the public service with very unsustainable workloads. In 2012, as well as through to 2013, history unfortunately repeated itself. And with the Harper conservative government, there was an elimination of another 26,000 jobs. This time, the workforce adjustment appendix was in place, but the cuts were so substantial that the system was just overwhelmed and it left employees again in limbo and without any real guarantees. Today, the public service is facing renewed threats of cuts, and PSAC is at the forefront of defending essential jobs and services. Through mobilization as well as bargaining, we've been able to push back against many of these attacks. This session is going to help folks understand what the rights are, as well as hopefully equip us with how we can try and protect ourselves. But it's definitely an ongoing battle, and folks are going to be impacted. We're already seeing that. So we're asking members to keep up the political pressure to stop these cuts and secure protections. And we have to do this together. Can you go to slide 7, Liz? During the recent federal election, it was announced that a new round of budget cuts aimed at saving 15.8 billion by 2027 to 2028, as well as another 4.8 billion the year after were going to happen. We're already seeing how these cuts are affecting various departments. The cuts are leading to restructuring and selective downsizing. The CRA has not been spared. Cuts started in 2024. And by the end of 2025, they are suggesting that there will be $65.7 million of savings through the cuts, and that will increase to $103 million by the end of 26. And it's going to continue to go up into 2027. The CRA is achieving these savings by eliminating what they determine are lower task jobs, and these cuts will affect daily operations of the agency. And I'm sure that some of you are already seeing that happening. We're often told that cuts are necessary to save money, but in reality, the government is still spending, especially on outsourcing. In 2021 alone, the federal government paid 15 billion to private companies and nearly 5 billion just in IT contracts alone. Ultimately, this isn't about saving money. It's a political maneuver that weakens our public services. Between 2010 and 2021, the population of Canada grew by almost 12.6% to over 38 million. And over that same period of time, the federal public service workforce grew by 12.9% to just over 319 million. In 2021, the federal public service made up 0.84% of the Canadian population. So a percentage that's similar to what the situation was in 2010. These figures show that the size of the public service has remained proportional to its population, and that this is more or less the case around the world. We're seeing this everywhere when it comes to public service. The challenge that the rhetoric is spreading is that there's an uncontrolled bureaucratic expansion and spending, and this is not the case when we see these types of statistics. The next slide, Liz. Budget cuts are affecting the entire public service, and it's leading to reorganization that directly undermines the quality and accessibility of services that Canadians rely on. We're also seeing a growing reliance on outsourcing. Rather than reducing costs, spending has simply shifted to the private sector. And this suggests that the current cutbacks are not an economic necessity, but rather about political choices. You probably have a lot of questions about downsizing and reorganization. Our priority today is going to be to offer as clear as possible a picture of the reorganization process and what it looks like, as well as to inform you of the resources that are available to help members through this period. We want to focus on well-being, and we're here to help you understand this process as well as support members through this transition. What we're going to be looking at are a few different questions. So what is workforce adjustment? What are your rights as a federal public service worker? What are your options if your job is cut? And where can you find support and resources? We want to be clear, PSAC remains committed to ensuring that every affected employee has access to the information and the tools that you need to navigate this really difficult time. Some of you have probably read the workforce adjustment appendix, and some of you are probably hearing about it for the first time today. And so just for a bit of historical context, we want to take a look at this timeline. In 1985, PSAC negotiated a workforce adjustment agreement with the federal government for the first time. In 1991, PSAC organized Canada's largest single union national strike in response to the Conservative Mulroney government's decision to freeze wages for the entire federal public sector. This strike enabled PSAC to negotiate the new Workforce Adjustment Directive for permanent employees. The directive is adopted by the National Joint Council, and it applied to all public service unions. The directive was separate from the collective agreement, but guaranteed reasonable job offers for affected employees. In 1995, Jean Chrétien's Liberal government froze public service wages, and the Treasury Board, as part of the deficit reduction plan, suspended the Workforce Adjustment Directive because it would have prevented job cuts as well as privatization, and that's where they wanted to go. In 1998, negotiation of the Workforce Adjustment Appendix restored protections for employees that would be affected by job cuts and ensured mitigation measures and a more equitable transition for public service workers. In 1999, the Canada Customs and Revenue Agency was created. In 2003, the Canada Revenue Agency was formed. In 2012, there was massive cuts to the federal government. The CRA, or Canada Revenue Agency, was part of what they called the Deficit Reduction Action Plan, or DRAPE. which affected 1 out of 7 federal public service workers. In 2016, major changes to the WFAA were negotiated based on the experience of the DRAPE cutbacks. These were the most significant improvements since PSAC negotiated the inclusion of a workforce adjustment appendix into its collective agreement in 1998. That's just a quick historical overview, but we know that this process and the threat of job loss is incredibly stressful for most. And so we want to share some resources that might be helpful. Please, if you are needing further support with mental health distress, visit the resource page and the QR code, as well as the national PSAC site. And more importantly, reach out to somebody, whether it's somebody in your local, somebody in your component, your family, someone at the PSAC regional office. Please seek help. We've already seen how this is affecting people's mental health, and there are supports available for folks. Um, Again, I just want to reiterate before I turn this over to Shell that at the bottom of your screen, you should see a function that is a Q&A box. And throughout the presentation, if you have any questions about the content, please type your question in that box. It will come to us and we will try and answer as many questions as possible throughout the presentation. It will all be recorded though. And if we're not able to get to your particular question or it's not answered in the content that we're sharing throughout the presentation, we will follow up with you after this presentation is done and get you a response or the information that you're requiring. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Shell, who's going to walk us through what WFAA looks like. Thanks, Shell.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Nicole. Thanks, Liz. So as Nicole mentioned, the last slide that we ended off with Nicole is the list of resources, support resources, that is. But I really want to re-emphasize it's worth repeating. Nicole did a great job of giving you encouragement to reach out to whether it be your local or the component, or the PSAC directly to your regional offices, or all of the above. And it's worth repeating because just so that you know where we're going with the presentation now, we will shift gears a bit. And my portion of the presentation will be quite technical to walk you through the process. But just know that we recognize that the difficulty that this whole situation poses for people, given the uncertainty and the anxiety that can create. The goal is that if we know what our rights are and what the steps are that should be followed, then we're able to make informed decisions, and we're also able to hold the employer accountable. Because if we don't know what the employer should be doing, then of course we don't know necessarily that they may not be following the process that they should be. So we do rely on you folks as members in the workplace, and also as the local leaders and component representatives, to do your best to be informed in the process so that we can work as a collective. So having said that, the screen that you have in front of you now is simply where can you find the WFAA? And as Nicole mentioned, we know that some of you may have already gone through it in detail, and some of you may be hearing about it for the first time here, or about the specifics of where to find it. And so we'll be starting at that basics where the WFAA is actually located. So in your collective agreement, so it forms part of your collective agreement, and specifically it's in Appendix Appendix C for the CRA. Okay, so that's in the collective agreement for CRA. And then we have listed here the other PSAC bargaining units who are bargaining units for Treasury Board. And the purpose of that is just so that you know that the WFAA is located in all members' collective agreements, but in different appendices. So you can refer to your collective agreement for the details. And also, you may already hopefully have access to your collective agreement, but if you're looking for it, all collective agreements can be found on the PSAC website as well. Next slide, please, Liz. So what is the purpose of the WFAA? So the purpose of the WFAA is PSAC has worked hard, as Nicole walked us through a lot of the history. We've fought hard to obtain and improve over the years. So specifically, the first purpose is to make sure everything is done to minimize negative impacts when changes to government priorities or changes to the way services are delivered are that they're announced. Ensure that the changes are accomplished with minimal job loss and wherever possible through redeployment without relocation. Limit the number of involuntary layoffs, which the WFAA enabled us to do when the last round of job cuts took place in the federal public service. And it also covers indeterminate workers. So unfortunately, at this time, term and casual employees are not covered by the WFAA. If you go to the next slide, please, Liz. So, and then just populate the screen, please. So, although the WFAA mainly protects permanent jobs at this point in time, PSAC continues to work hard to stand up for temporary employees as well. We're working with the joint committees to ensure that long-term temporary employees finally get the fair treatment that they deserve. And although we won't be going into the term aspect in detail here, you can also consult with the CRA's directive on terms and conditions of employment to learn more details and specifics of the term positions. But know that PSAC recognizes that this is a live and difficult issue that we remain committed to improving for term and contract employees. So next slide, please. So the reasons for a workforce adjustment, a few key points here is to highlight why. So this slide refers back to the flow chart that you have. It's in your link tree. And my suggestion, the flow chart is excellent. I'm not going to lie, it looks cumbersome, but if you take the time to sit down and work through it, it is very informative and has details for each point in the process for the WFAA. But I do encourage you to listen to the presentation simply because it's difficult to follow along with both. For the purposes of this slide, when does a workforce adjustment situation occur? And when could your employment be jeopardized? Or why? So firstly, a lack of work, discontinuance of a function, relocation of a work unit in which the employee does not wish to participate, and then lastly, an alternative service delivery initiative. So the transfer of any work, undertaking, or business of the public service to any body or corporation that is a separate employer or outside of the public service. So privatization of different services. I just want to add a point here that sometimes only specific positions are affected by a workforce adjustment, whereas in other cases, the adjustment may involve entire work sections, functions, or departments. Situations involving alternate service delivery use specific processes and procedures. Next slide, please, Liz. So before workforce adjustment is announced, the CRA must establish WFAA committees where appropriate to manage workforce adjustments. And the WFAA sets out a key role for the committees. So their mission is to develop strategies to address various workforce management factors, which include training and developing employees to help them adapt to organizational changes. Secondly, interorganizational and positional mobility, so facilitating employee redeployment. Alternation is we will there will be a component of the presentation as we continue along. There'll be a component of the alternation that, or sorry, of the presentation that goes into alternation process in detail. Employability, so to ensure that employees have the tools and resources they need to move within the public sector. Ensuring term employees are not being exploited. And managing outsourcing to businesses, employment agencies, and consultants to limit the replacement of federal employees with contract employees. And then lastly, an overview of voluntary departure programs to ensure that they are equitable and beneficial for affected employees. So these committees all play a crucial role in ensuring a just and equitable transition for public service workers affected by a workforce adjustment. So the evolution of workforce adjustments, Nicole walked us through the history of workforce adjustments and the ebbs and flows of the public service. So just to remind you that after significant job losses in the federal public service in 2012 to 2013, so that's when the workforce adjustment appendix was revised to improve support for affected employees and to facilitate their transition. So to this end, a more structured mechanism was created, specifically the joint committees that are now commonly known as the workforce adjustment committees. So at the CRA, these committees offer recommendations and communicate information on workforce adjustments. So at the Canada Revenue Agency, a national joint workforce adjustment committee brings together the employer and the union to discuss cuts and how they will affect employees. Minutes of these meetings are available on the UTE website. They're an excellent resource for understanding the issues that are discussed and the decisions that are made. The UTE has also established a standing union committee to focus on being proactive, sharing information, and strengthening our collective response. And again, the records of these meetings are also available online. So the website is quite thorough and transparent in this respect if you've not already visited it. So in addition to the national committee, the regional and local workforce adjustment committees may be set up depending on the needs of the workplace and the local context. So to find out what's happening in your regional workplace, the best suggestion is to contact your component representatives, and they can give you the latest information on how the CRA plans to deal with this new wave of cuts. And then at this point, I just want to refer you, Nicole also mentioned, and I see that Liz has also popped the link tree back in the chat, that there is a fact sheet that contains a lot of this information that I've just covered. And I want to emphasize that there is no single committee model. So each workplace organizes their joint committees in their own way. But again, I encourage you to contact your local or component for more details on how the committee is structured and overseen. But thanks to this development, public service workers affected by cuts will now benefit from more support and better adapted solutions to facilitate the reinstatement within the public service. So again, an emphasis to connect with the local, or if you are a local officer, to connect with the component, and so that there's a flow of information from the top to the bottom and bottom to the top, so that we are working again as a collective. Next slide, please, Liz. So with this slide is going to shift us a bit into the specific process of the workforce adjustment. So this is a step-by-step breakdown. You've got 5 points that you see in front of you. And so this is an overview so that you know where we're going in the presentation now. This is an overview of the steps in the process, but we will further break down each step in more detail. So the workforce adjustment occurs when the CRA decides that the service of one or more permanent employees will not be required on a specific date. So the process involves, oh, sorry, Liz, you can go back up. So the process involves several key steps that must be followed in a particular order to facilitate equitable transition. So firstly, there's a notice of workforce adjustment. Secondly, notice to affected employees. Thirdly, voluntary departure program as needed. Fourthly, the CRA's merit-based retention selection process, and we will speak about that in detail. And then the fifth point in the process is layoffs and reassignments. Okay, thanks, Liz. Next slide, please. Okay, so provide notice of workforce adjustment. So before informing the affected employees, the CRA is obligated to follow these steps. So one, the way that the CRA is required to inform the union, required to form PSAC, is giving notice to the PSAC president a minimum of 2 days before communicating with the affected employees. The name and location of the work units affected, the planned announcement date, the planned time frame for the workforce adjustment, and the number of employees affected by level and by group must be shared. So consultation with the union to assess impacts and possible mitigation. So ultimately, the purpose of this is to work with the unions to ensure a fair and transparent process. Okay, next slide, please, Liz. So the second step in the process is sending notice to the affected employees. So public service workers who might lose their jobs will receive a written notice informing them of their status as a quote affected employee. So notice of affected status, what is it? Specifically, it is a notice of affected status, is a notification that a position could be eliminated as part of a workforce adjustment. At this stage, the affected person has not been made surplus. The notice merely informs them that the specific position may be affected. If no solution is found, the person may be made surplus. So in accordance with the WFAA, such a communication may also include, may also indicate if the employee is being provided a guarantee of a reasonable job offer from the commissioner, and that the employee will be in surplus status from that day on, or is an opting employee and has access to the options set out in the WFAA that we will go through in detail, because the employee is not in receipt of a guarantee of a reasonable job offer from the commissioner. So where applicable, the communication should also provide the information relative to the employee's possible layoff date. If the government has yet to determine who will receive a guarantee of a reasonable job offer and who will be declared opting, the letter will only state that the person is affected. So it may not provide the specific details of the affected status. So it's important to note here that understand that a person who receives such a notice has not been surplused. Unless the selection process has already taken place, the notice of affected status will be very brief. So you will notice that I am intentionally trying to put emphasis on the mays and the mights, because it's not to take away the stressful nature of this letter, but oftentimes the letter will be very brief, providing notice that the position is an affected position, that you'd be an affected employee, but nothing is finalized in terms of the specifics of it. So I also want to add a very important point here for members to be aware of, and most specifically for the local union officers to be aware of, is that if an employee is on long-term leave, so whether it be sick leave, parental leave, maternity leave, those employees will receive notice of the workforce adjustment at the same time as others in the unit. However, if they are subsequently made surplus, no final decision can be made until they return from their leave. The reason why this is an important point is it is not spelled out in the WFAA, but it's essential for local union officers to speak with the employer to ensure that employees on leave who wish to participate in the retention process be given a real opportunity to do so. So you can appreciate that if that's not possible, an agreement be negotiated to postpone the decision until their return, because processing a workforce adjustment in an employee's absence while they're on leave may be seen as discriminatory, especially if it limits their ability to defend their rights or to access their options. So ultimately, the aim is to ensure that the process is fair and inclusive and respectful for everyone. Thanks, Liz. Okay, that brings us to the third point in the process. So the third step in the process is the voluntary departure program. So this is an option before the retention process takes place. So the workforce adjustment appendix requires that a voluntary departure program be established in cases where 5 or more employees of the same work group, level, and unit are affected, and when no reasonable job offer can be guaranteed. So even when a voluntary departure program is not required, organizations may choose to set one up to assess departure requests throughout the workforce adjustment process. Joint workforce adjustment committees may also consider establishing the voluntary departure programs. So the goals and the implementation of a voluntary departure program is ultimately to reduce the number of employees that must be selected for retention or layoff, and in some cases, to completely avoid the retention process. So the program is set up after employees have received their notice of affected status, but before the selection process. So the number of eliminated positions is determined in advance. Voluntary departures do not increase the number of cut positions. In the event of a surplus of volunteers, selection will be based on seniority. So that's total years of service, continuous or non-continuous. Employees will have an opting period of at least 30 days as required by the Workforce Adjustment Appendix. And then lastly, affected employees will have access to transition support measures and an education allowance. So eligible employees may also have the option to a pension waiver. The program allows employees to choose from these options that we will go through in more detail. So it's option B, C1, or C2. And don't worry, we will get there and walk through each of those options in more detail. So ultimately, the objective here, again, going back to it, to offer public service workers the option to either, resign voluntarily, and also to reduce the number of layoffs. So to provide voluntary alternative and limit the number of layoffs. Okay, thank you, Liz. Next slide, please. So the fourth point in the process is we are going to talk about the retention process, and specifically the merit-based retention selection process. So if the voluntary departure program that we just spoke about, if it does not eliminate all the surplus positions, the retention process may be implemented to determine which employees will be retained and which employees will be laid off when part, but not all, of the employees of an agency sector are laid off. So this process is instigated solely by the employer and is not part of the collective agreement. There's more detail on this matter in fact sheets number 2 and 4, which you have access to in your link tree that you can go through after the presentation as well. So in the case of a workforce adjustment, the CRA follows a merit-based retention selection process. In this context, merit is defined as an employee's ability to perform the duties of a position based on criteria such as qualifications, relevant experience, and past performance. So I'm going to give you an example here. And again, this is also in the fact sheet. So if you want to just sit back and listen as I do my best to walk through the example, know that you'll have access to it in the resources in your link tree. So as an example, suppose a CRA office needs to eliminate four of 8 clerk positions. The employer will evaluate each employee based on merit criteria such as work experience, performance evaluations, and additional training to determine which 4 employees will be retained. So it's important to note here, unlike the federal public service workers under Treasury Board, CRA does not apply the SURLO policy. So instead, the agency has its own merit-based retention process under its WFA process. So the CRA WFA process policy can be found on all of you will be familiar with this on the CRA's employee-facing intranet site, the info zone. Okay, so I'm just going to speak briefly in more detail about the difference between this process, the merit-based retention selection process, and SURLO. So the difference, if you want to learn more about the merit-based system that CRA employs and the Treasury Board's SURLO process, again, I'd like to refer you back to the fact sheets number 2 and 4 that you have in your link tree. But regardless of the process that's used, PSAC will continue to advocate for more fairness and transparency and to make the process less arbitrary in all the decisions that affect the members. And I just want to add that the difference between the merit procedures and SURLO are in your fact sheet, and what it does is it compares the processes and provides concrete examples, just to highlight that there are differences in the CRA WFA and the Treasury Board WFA and how they apply that particular portion of the retention selection process. Okay, next slide, please, Liz. Okay, so CRA's retention selection process is merit-based. This warrants its own slide because in theory, this approach is designed to retain the most skilled staff when jobs are cut. In practice, however, we are going to acknowledge that it carries serious risks that need to be exposed. So the risks, firstly, the lack of a clear and consistent criteria opens the door to arbitrary decisions. So what this means is that managers can judge merit very subjectively, which can lead to favoritism and unfair outcomes. So most importantly, this lack of clarity increases the risk of discrimination and employment equity violations, particularly for members from equity deserving groups. Specifically, PSAC demands that in response to these issues, we call for objective and transparent criteria and their consistent application of such criteria, and also compliance with the Employment Equity Act, particularly for the following equity groups, including women, Indigenous people, people with disabilities, and racialized people. So these fundamental principles should guide any workforce adjustment process. But again, I'm going to highlight here what we hope for through these education sessions where you folks as members or maybe local officers or even component representatives, things that we're able to watch out for is to watch closely for the methods that are used to assess merit. So currently managers decide which approach to take, and which gives them a lot of discretion and again opens the door to unfair treatment. That's why it's important for us as a union to remain vigilant and bring this issue to the Joint Workforce Adjustment Committee. So just in closing on that piece, this process is different from a staffing competition where candidates are compared. However, for this process, it's current employees that are being compared and assessed. So again, it warrants repeating that it's our our job in the workplace to do our best to make sure that we are holding the employer accountable and that there's transparency in the process. So next slide, please, Liz. Thanks. Okay, so now this brings us to the fifth point in the process. So what happens next? So the fifth and final point in the process is layoffs. And so understanding the two processes, that we will break down in detail. So understanding what surplus status is. So after the voluntary departure program and or the retention process have wrapped up, the employer must inform affected employees in writing if they are being made surplus. In a workforce adjustment, an employee is considered to surplus once they have been officially informed that their position will be eliminated on a particular date. So receiving a notice of surplus status recognizably is very stressful and can cause uncertainty, but it can also open the door to assistance measures and create reassignment opportunities. So unlike an immediate layoff, surplus status bestows rights and opportunities to affected employees that help them find a new position in the public sector or to explore new career opportunities elsewhere. So again, recognizing the uncertainty of that and of course in being in receipt of such a letter, but this is our goal with the presentation, is to be able to walk you through knowing what your rights are. So the objective, in the objective section, of the CRA WFAA, the employer affirms its commitment to ensure fair treatment of indeterminate employees whose services are no longer required due to workforce adjustment. So it's important that the reason why we highlight this here is that this is enshrined in your collective agreement that the employer has made this commitment to this process about participating in this fair treatment of employees and making sure that the WFAA process is followed. So if the commissioner knows or can reasonably anticipate that a position will become available, these employees will be guaranteed a reasonable job offer within the CRA. For employees who cannot be guaranteed a reasonable job offer, the CRA will provide transitional options or other suitable employment arrangements. And further in the presentation, we will speak about those options in detail. So finally, if the commissioner cannot offer a reasonable position within the CRA, the agency commits to actively assist affected employees in finding another position in the federal public service, as defined in Schedule 1 of the Financial Administration Act. So in accordance with the WFAA, the commissioner must apply this policy in such a way as to avoid involuntary layoffs wherever and whenever possible. So layoffs should only occur if the employee refuses a reasonable job offer, is not mobile, and cannot be retrained or asks to be laid off. So now with that, we're going to go on your screen in front of you, you have the two possible processes. So I'm going to take a minute to walk through what those two specific processes are for a surplus employee. So firstly, if the employer anticipates that a position will be available, the surplus employee will receive a guarantee of a reasonable job offer. So to signify that they will receive reassignment priority to another position within the CRA. According to the WFAA, a guarantee of a reasonable job offer is a commitment by the commissioner to offer an indeterminate permanent position at the CRA to an employee affected by workforce adjustment. So the guarantee applies when the commissioner knows or can reasonably anticipate that a position at the CRA will become available. So I want to make a note here that the guarantee referenced in the WFAA only applies to jobs within the CRA. However, if the employer cannot guarantee a reasonable job offer at the CRA, the commissioner agrees to help the employee find a new job in the federal public service. And this is outlined in the WFAA objectives. So people who receive this guarantee, do not have access to other transition options that are offered to opting employees. So the second point, the second possible process is if no position is available. So if the employer cannot guarantee a position to a surplus employee, that person will be considered an opting employee. So opting employees can choose between different options to help them transition to a new job, whether within or outside of the public service. So opting employees have 120 days to assess their situation and choose one of the provided options, whether it be A, B, C1, or C2, as per the WFAA in the collective agreement. And again, we're going to talk about opting employees in more detail, and we have a number of slides that will break down those specific options that I just referenced. So this process strives to ensure that each person affected by a workforce adjustment has access to structured support and solutions specifically tailored to their situation. So let's examine the two processes in detail to better understand their outcomes and the steps that are involved. So again, this is where I referenced it earlier. We have a number of slides that we're going to continue with to break down the different options and the different routes in the WFAA process. But just know that you also have that flow chart that I referenced earlier, but I encourage you to, for the purposes of the presentation, if you want to follow along with us, pop any questions that you might have into the chat, the Q&A box, but just know that you have a very detailed flowchart that you can go back to walk through the process that we're going to detail here. So there's also another process if the WFAA situation in your workplace is caused by a change, such as the relocation of your work unit. Or also, secondly, a complete closure of the facility, an alternative service delivery initiative. So that means the transfer of work done in the public service to another body or external corporation. So privatization of services. There's a number of additional processes, those three processes that could arise. These situations we won't be spending in more detail. But again, you do have more resources in your link tree to go into that in detail. So Liz, I'm just going to ask you to go to the next slide now. So where that brings us to in the presentation is we've walked through the 5 different steps in the WFA process. So now we're going to break down in more detail the process in the event of a guarantee of a reasonable job offer. So the process that's laid out in the WFAA for situations where the employer informs you that your services will no longer be required beyond a specific date, but a guarantee of a reasonable job offer may still be provided. So a guarantee of a reasonable job offer gives you surplus preferred status. So you have surplus preferred status until you receive a reasonable job offer and are appointed, or you are laid off, or you resign from the CRA. So during this time, you receive your salary and the employer will assign you duties. However, your main job is to find another job. So work must not hinder that responsibility. Finding another job is your primary responsibility. The employer is obligated to pay you to pay you while you are doing the search and prioritizing looking for another job. And there will still be meaningful work in most cases, though in other cases there may not be reasonable work, but the employer is not, you will not be expected to do unreasonable work if the employer has no work for you, but you must still be paid. So, what is a reasonable job offer under the CRA's WFAA? So, there's a number of points that you have in front of you on the slide. Just to go through these in detail, what is a reasonable job offer? When an employee is declared surplus, the CRA may make the employee a reasonable job offer to avoid laying them off. And what that means in practice is the criteria for this reasonable job is it's considered to be reasonable if it comes from the CRA. It must meet these conditions. So it comes from the CRA and is for an indeterminate or permanent position. It is usually at the same level as your current position. So this is where salary protection comes in play. So lower level positions may also be offered and are not ruled out, but salary protections apply. So the position will be located where possible within your headquarters as defined by the travel directive. However, relocation may be required if local positions are not available. So relocation is when the workplace is moved at least 40 kilometers from its original location, or what would be referred to as the headquarters location. So in this process, you must be mobile and trainable. That is, able to accept another position or relocate if necessary. So offers from other federal departments or agencies. I want to make a note here, you have it on your slide as well, that a reasonable job offer may also come from another employer within the core public administration. And again, that's listed in Schedule 1. Those potential employers are listed in Schedule 1 of the Financial Administration Act. So if the offer meets the following criteria, the rate of pay and maximum salary for the new position are not lower than the current position. Again, that's the salary protection. And then secondly, no employment benefits are lost. And the employment benefits include recognition of your years of service, accumulated sick and vacation leave, accumulated severance pay, and your continuous employment status. Okay, next slide, please, Liz. Okay, so we're going to break down even further if you receive a reasonable job offer. So there's two options here. So we're going to speak in detail about if you accept or if you refuse the reasonable job offer. So this slide details if you accept the reasonable job offer and the appointment is to a lower level position, your salary is protected, and your name is added to a reinstatement priority list for reappointment to your formal level, and you are entitled to retraining if required. So that's if you accept the reasonable job offer. If we go to the next slide, we'll go through what happens if you refuse the reasonable job offer. So you will be laid off 6 months after your surplus period began. You will have a layoff notice of at least 1 month. Your name will be placed on a layoff priority list or preferred list within the Public Service Commission for at least 1 year. And you are eligible for severance pay minus any severance already paid out. You will not be eligible for any of the WFAA payments. So our purpose here, the purpose of this step in the process is for people, for affected members to understand the consequences of your decision, ultimately with the goal so that you have all of the information that you need to have after consulting with the union and obviously to be able to plan the best way possible for your future. Okay, now we're going to talk about options for employees without a guarantee of a reasonable job offer. So what happens if it has been decided that your services are no longer required beyond a specific date and your employer cannot guarantee a reasonable job offer? So in such cases, the employer must provide reasons in writing why a guarantee cannot be made. they will consider you an opting employee and not be provided a reasonable job offer. So that's what an opting employee means, is that you have not been provided a reasonable job offer or a guarantee of a reasonable job offer. So you will be given 3 options to help you make the transition to other employment. You will have a reflection period of 120 days to decide. You must choose in writing one of the 3 options from, this is in section 6.4 of the appendix. So you have 120 days to make the decision during that period. You cannot change your mind once you have chosen an option in writing. So the CRA will send a copy of the employee's decision to PSAC. If you do not make a decision or make a choice during this period, you will be deemed to have selected option A, which is surplus preferred status, to secure a reasonable job offer. So again, I keep referring back to the resources that you have that you can go through the details of this. But just to walk you through what the 3 options are, is there on the slide in front of you. Once an employee is declared to be opting and you will not receive a guarantee of a reasonable job offer, you can choose from these following options. So there's option A, which is an employee with surplus preferred status. So the employee receives priority hiring within the CRA for a period based on your years of service. Option B, transition support measure. So the transition support measure, or TSM, is when the employee chooses to leave the public service in exchange for a cash payment based on your years of service. And again, we'll go through this in more detail. And lastly, there's option C, which provides the employee receives the TSM, so the transition support measure from option B, as well as up to $17,000 to finance their schooling. So they may choose to either resign immediately, or there's a second option to go on leave without pay for 2 years while attending school. Okay, now we're going to, as I promised, we're going to go through each of the 3 options for opting employees. And I just want to make a quick point here. Sometimes you will hear people refer to the 3 options for opting employees or the 4 options for opting employees. So this can sometimes be a source of confusion, but I'm just flagging it because there's option A, B, and C. But C has 2 options within it. So earlier in the presentation, you might have heard me refer to option A, B, C1, or C2. Okay, I just want to flag that because we are sometimes questioned about that. So for this point in time, we're going to go through the options in a bit more detail. So option A is for employees with surplus preferred status. Okay, so surplus employee with preferred hiring status. So under the WFAA, only opting employees who do not receive a guarantee of a reasonable job offer from the commissioner may choose option A, a surplus preferred status period to seek a reasonable job offer. So the length of the surplus preferred status period is based on your years of service in the federal public service, beginning on the date the commissioner informs you in writing that you are an opting employee. So it's less than 10 years of credited service. Sorry, if you have less than 10 years of credited service, the period is 12 months. If you have 10 to 20 years, you have 14 months. And if you have more than 20 years of service, then you have 16 months. So also, upon request, this period can be extended by adding any unused portion of the 120-day opting period under the WFAA, provided that you have formally selected option A in writing. So if no reasonable job offer is made during this period, the employee will be laid off in accordance with paragraph 15 of the Canada Revenue Agency Act, and they will then be granted priority hiring status for appointment within the CRA. So under the agency staffing program for a period of 15 months starting from the date of layoff. Voluntary departure before the end of the priority period. So this is when a surplus employee has chosen or is deemed to have chosen option A. So remember, if you do not put notify the employer in writing of your choice between the options, you will be deemed to have chosen option A. So you may offer to resign before the end of the priority period, and the commissioner may authorize a lump sum payment equivalent to the remaining salary for up to a maximum of 6 months, 6 months of pay. So, and then just a last point here. This payment cannot exceed what the employees would have received under option B, which is the transition support measure. Okay, thank you, Liz. We're going to go to option B now. So option B is the transition support measure. So again, this is the second option, option B, for opting employees. So the employee voluntarily resigns from the public service and receives a cash payment based on their years of service with the federal public service. So this is as per appendix in the collective agreement. So for example, if you have 10 years of service in the federal public service, either continuous or non-continuous, you are entitled to a payment equivalent to 40 weeks of pay. So this compensation can be paid in one or two lump sum amounts over a maximum of 2 years for favorable tax treatment. You must resign to receive this compensation, but you retain the right to severance pay equivalent to the offer in case of layoff. And if you choose this option, you will have to give up your priority status. Okay, so just again, closing that option B off, the objective of this is ultimately to offer financial compensation to facilitate the transition out of the public service. So with that, we're going to go into option C now, which is the education allowance. So option C, as I mentioned earlier, is a combination of option B, which is the transition support measure, with financial aid for schooling. So the employer receives the transition support measure plus up to $17,000 for tuition fees from a recognized institution, and also books and supplies, keeping in mind that you maintain your receipts. The education allowance can be made in either one or two lump sum payments over a 2-year period. And then this is where I mentioned that there's two sub options within option C. So immediate resignation, which means the employee receives their severance pay and resigns from the public service, or option 2 within option C is leave without pay for up to 2 years. So the employee can delay their departure date while attending the learning institution. And during this leave, they have the option to retain benefits and retirement coverage if they pay both their share and the employer's share. So at the end of the 2-year period of leave without pay, the employee will be laid off unless they have secured another position at the CRA. So if the employee does not provide proof of registration within 12 months of starting their leave, they will be deemed to have resigned and be laid off. So that's an important point within this option, that you must provide proof of your registration at a recognized education institution. So others, just briefly, some other important information here: support for reorientation. The last point here on your slide about other provisions is there's all opting employees are entitled to $1,200 for counseling services. So this can include career reorientation, financial planning, etc. And then there's also the requirement for reimbursement in the event of rehiring. So what this means is that if an employee who received the transition support measure, or the TSM, or education allowance finds a position in the public service, they must reimburse part of the amount received. So tuition fees and supply costs need not be reimbursed. Okay, thanks, Liz. So the three options are tailored to the needs of surplus employees. So just in a conclusion to wrap up the different options that we just went through in detail. So these three options offer alternatives adapted to the needs of the employees, of affected employees in the workforce adjustment process. So option A facilitates attempts to remain employed within the public service. Option B offers financial compensation in case of voluntary departure. And option C supports career transitions with financial support for studies. So the last point here on your slide, again, is that each employee should choose based on your own personal and professional situation. And of course, we're going through these details with you so that you can make that informed decision. But again, just to repeat and reiterate the importance of connecting with the union to make sure that you fully understand the options that are available to you and what rights you are entitled to under each of those options. So that closes off the section on, thanks Liz, on what happens for if you receive a guarantee of a reasonable job offer, or if you are considered an opting employee and the options that you have when you have the designation of an opting employee. So with that, we're going to go to the next slide now. And I promised you that we would come back to alternation and speak in a bit of detail about what the alternation process means, and why it exists. And there's also some important changes that came through negotiations where improvements were actually made to this alternation process and what members are entitled to engage in this process. So what does alternation mean? Alternation, what it means is it allows affected employees, so employees who are affected by workforce adjustment, to switch places or alternate with an unaffected employee who would like to leave the agency. So the affected employee retains a job in the CRA, and the unaffected employee who would like to leave resigns voluntarily. The benefit of this is the organization avoids layoffs and limits the impact of job cuts. So who can alternate? So there's a new and important rule that previously only opting employees, so those who did not receive a letter guaranteeing a reasonable job offer of employment and were within their 120-day reflection period, could alternate. So now surplus employees who have chosen this option, so option A, so priority status to a surplus employee, they're now also eligible to take part in the process. So the eligible workers include opting employees, surplus employees who chose the preferred hiring option, so option A, and unaffected employees who want to leave the CRA. So as an example, this doesn't have to be the case, but perhaps somebody who is nearing retirement and wanting to leave early. So we're going to, if you go to the next slide, Liz, please, we will go through the alternation process in a bit more detail. So how does it work? So firstly, the unaffected employees who want to leave the CRA register their interest in alternating. Secondly, an opting or surplus employee identifies a potential alternate. Thirdly, management investigates whether the alternation is possible by ensuring the affected employee meets all of the requirements of the alternate's position. This includes skills, languages, etc. And then fourthly, if the alternation is accepted, the unaffected employee leaves the CRA within 5 days and the affected employee immediately begins their new position. An alternation can take place between employees at the same group and level, so it may also occur between positions considered equivalent, that is, positions where the maximum rate of pay for the higher paid position does not exceed the maximum rate for the lower paid position by more than 6%. So within section 6.3 of the WFAA, this section allows for alternation within the CRA. However, under the objectives in the WFAA, the CRA is also committed to supporting employees in their search for opportunities elsewhere in the federal public service. So in other words, what this means is if your position is affected, the CRA has a responsibility to help you explore other options. And again, that's enshrined in the appendix in the collective agreement. So if we go to the next slide, Liz. So how does alternation work and what do you need to know? So the alternation must result in the elimination of a position, and the alternation must be direct and executed the same day. So what this means is that there can't be any chain reactions. So the alternation cannot be rejected for administration reasons as well. So the employer can't make an arbitrary decision based on administrative reasons to reject the alternation. So of importance, I'm going to make an important note here that with the new wave of budget cuts on the horizon, it's important to understand that the mechanisms for alternation are not yet fully defined. So the exact details of how this process will be implemented are still being worked out and may vary by region depending on where the employee is located. So there is, however, a useful tool. In 2015, the CRA launched a tool called the Alternation Calculator that some of you may be aware of. And the purpose of this alternation calculator is it helps determine which occupational groups and levels were considered equivalent for alternation purposes. So the goal of this alternation calculator is to simplify the process for alternation. The tool has since been updated and can be used as a reference if you're considering going this route. It's important to stay informed during this period of uncertainty because, as I mentioned, this process, the alternation process, is still requiring finalization. So again, we encourage you to stay well connected with your the UTE component representatives through your local. They will be the best source of up-to-date information on what the process is and the tools that are available to you to make the most informed decision. Okay, thank you, Liz. So at this point, I also promised you earlier on that we would speak about the pension waiver. So the pension waiver, employees who are between the ages of 55 and 64 who are declared surplus and do not receive a guarantee of a reasonable job offer may be eligible for a waiver of the pension reduction. So it applies to the pension waiver applies to employees who are laid off or resign under the provisions of the WFAA, except that it does not apply to employees who refuse a reasonable job offer or who choose the education allowance. So those are the criteria that's important to be aware of. So for the specific conditions, you can actually check in detail here okay, so we go through a bit more detail here. The details for group 1, that is for the folks age 55 to 59 who are hired before January 1st, 2013. And then there's a second group for individuals who are age 60 to 64 and hired after January 1st, 2013. So what's important for the pension waiver and eligibility? So you can look on there's details within the WFAA itself, but I also encourage you to go to the Treasury Board or to the Government of Canada website, where I was actually able to just testing this to see what resources are available. You have your resources in the link tree, and it's also detailed in the WFAA, but also you can walk through um, the different criteria on the Government of Canada pension waiver site itself. It has a lot of extensive information there that is quite easy to follow. So I know that on this slide we have click here, but that's why I'm making it clear that you can honestly simply Google pension waiver or pension in Government of Canada, and you'll be able to get more details, further details in this. But of course, as with all of the options we've been encouraging you to do, to also please reach out to your local or component representatives, or of course your respective regional offices. Okay, next slide, please, Liz. So, the preferred status entitlement, this is something that we want. It's a mechanism that facilitates job retention and reinstatement. It applies to some employees who are affected by a workforce adjustment or other certain conditions. The goal is that it facilitates preferred, quote, preferred reinstatement or retention of an employee's position in the CRA. And for the purposes of the preferred status entitlement, we don't cover it in detail here, but what we've put on the link tree is if you have any specific questions about this, again, you have your union representative who can help you with any details, but it's also addressed in the procedures for staffing. So in Appendix D, of the preferred staffing, procedures for staffing. This is in your link tree, and it's Appendix D that you can go through in detail what preferred status means. So for the purposes of this presentation, we won't go through it in detail, as we were working hard to cover all of the different options within WFAA. But again, you have this resource here that you can walk through in detail. Thanks, Liz. So at this point in the presentation, we're heading down to wrap things up. We want to draw your attention to key terms related to the workforce adjustment. And I really appreciate that Nicole already referenced the glossary that you have. And the reason why we want to highlight all of these key terms and the glossary that you have available to you is because we recognize that, especially if you're hearing a lot of these terms for the first time, we recognize it's a lot of information. It can be overwhelming. But know that when you work through the flow chart that you have, you can use your glossary, the WFAA glossary, as a resource just to draw you back to make sure that you have a resource to help you work through the guide or the flow chart that you've been provided. So just to take a couple quick examples from the glossary, Liz, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So a couple of the definitions, we talked about an opting employee and the different options that an opting employee have. So in summary, an opting employee, and again, this is simply from the glossary, an opting employee is an indeterminate employee whose services are no longer required because of a workforce adjustment and who has not received a guarantee of a reasonable job offer of employment from the commissioner. The employee has 120 days to assess their options per section 6.4 of the WFAA. So if you went to that section of the WFAA, you would see option A, B, C, and C1 and C2 detailed in the appendix. Next slide, please. Another definition that we talked about, a surplus employee is an indeterminate employee who has been formally declared surplus in writing by the commissioner. And again, this is simply a definition pulled from the WFAA glossary. Next slide, please. And then one final example of the definitions that you can find in the WFAA glossary is an affected employee. So an indeterminate employee who has been informed in writing that their services may no longer be required because of a workforce adjustment. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me through the technical aspects of the WFAA process. We really hope that we've provided you with a number of different resources that you can refer back to. We know that there's a lot of information from a technical perspective that we went through. So again, you'll have access to the recording for this presentation and the technical pieces. And then also the resources in your link tree, but I dare say most importantly, your colleagues in the workplace, your local representatives, the component representatives, and all of us, your respective regional offices. So with that, I'm going to thank you for your attention during the technical piece of the presentation, and I'm going to turn things back over to Nicole. Nicole will be able to walk us through what the key steps are in the process at this point.
Thanks, Shell. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of information and a lot of possibilities and options that can feel really overwhelming. So we just want to remind folks that if you have received a notice of affected status, just, you know, take take some time, right, and acknowledge all of the stress that can come with that. And then definitely before making any decisions around what your best kind of path is, talk to your family, reach out to your union reps at the various levels that Shell just acknowledged and outlined, and just take the time that you need to make that decision. Obviously, within the time frame that you have that Shell has outlined and that is outlined in the appendix, and that should also be in your letter. But don't rush to make a decision, because this is um, a really difficult one for a lot of folks to make. I just want to reiterate, and we're going to do this time and time again, there's so many different paths and opportunities for you to get support, whether locally in your workplace with your local representatives, or within your component, as well as through the PSAC, your regional office, and the various websites that have lots of information when you are making this really difficult decision. Um, if you aren't currently facing workforce adjustment, it's always good to be prepared, as well as to be in a position where you may be able to help or support a colleague of yours. Seek out training like this one, because there will be other opportunities, whether online or in person, as well as seek out training for yourself, just so that you can constantly be updating skills and your ability to be employable. Also, know your rights and what the options are as you're going through these types of a process, whether again you're affected or not. It's just good to know what your rights are in these situations, and then definitely make use of the wellness tool that can help you with, addressing any kind of stress or issues that you're having regarding the fact that this is taking place in our workplaces. And there's um, supports available and resources available for that on your component website, as well as the PSAC website. We would also encourage all of you, keep um, your resume, as well as any certifications that you might have, updated. And if that's something that you can, start to think about and look into and do now, it's better to be prepared as possible for whatever is coming down the road. On the link tree, there is a fact sheet number 3, which offers advice on preparing for a workforce adjustment situation. So that's a good fact sheet to have a look at, just in terms of being proactive around this situation. A couple important reminders before we end is just the workforce adjustment appendix is a key protection that was negotiated by your union, and it guarantees that all staff reductions are conducted in a fair and equitable manner. And PSAC is here to support. UT is here to support, to assist, and to equip folks as much as possible. So don't hesitate to ask for that help. Liz, Shell, and I just want to thank you all for your time participating in this, giving up a Saturday morning. And if there is anything that we can do to support or help you, our contact information is listed in the link tree. You can reach out to the closest regional office, or you can contact one of us, and we're also willing to support in any way that we can. So thank you all for being here. Shell or Liz, did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. I just would like to echo Nicole's sentiments about thanking everybody for making the effort and making the time to be here on a Saturday morning. We're grateful for your participation. And I also encourage you to, given the nature of the number of participants that we have in these sessions, it's simply logistically not possible to have it as interactive. But we are trying to deliver, this is only one means by which we are delivering education about the process for WFA. But if you would like us to come to the workplace or offer sessions in the evening, we are fully prepared to be able to deliver the different sessions in different forums. We're happy to do that. We encourage you to reach out either to your local or to your respective regional office or your component. Just know that all of us are keen to do that and want to be able to assist in every way that we can. So I just encourage you to not feel that this is the one and only education opportunity on the process. That's to reach out for creating this another education opportunity in a different setting or a different forum, should you be interested in that, or for your members who weren't able to participate in either one of the sessions this week. Thank you for being here. Liz, I don't want to speak for you, but I don't know if we just give a second if I think Liz is busy frantically, I shouldn't say frantically, but Liz has diligently been keeping up with questions. And so I want to thank my co-facilitators for doing that. And again, with that, we just thank you for giving us your Saturday morning. We remain eternally grateful, and we look forward to working together as a collective. Take care, everybody.